Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. Thanks so much to those of you who have rated the show, and I appreciate MegWag19 and LA Mom and Educator for their recent reviews. Today, I'll talk with journalist Lindsay Lee Wallace about what becomes news and how. For folks who have followed me on Instagram or who have listened to this podcast for a couple months, you'll know that the enthusiasm I've had for dissecting the conversation about ultra-processed foods comes from media coverage of UPFs and nutrition generally. My critique began in May when National Public Radio started a year-long series called Living Better, telling us they were presenting an opportunity to, quote, take back our health. They prefaced this conversation discussing how obvious health disparities had become during the pandemic. They promised us answers to these problems. The series was going to be about hope, which sounds nice. I was hopeful. I decided to follow along. And then the first story in the series was about weight loss surgery and weight loss drugs for children. Medications that have never been tested or studied in children have no long-term data in adults, and surgeries that result in malnutrition and adverse side effects in kids were supposed to be the stories of hope that address health disparities. And my own hope for this series flew out the window and into the trash. The series then went on to talk about ultra-processed foods, the theory of anti-dopamine parenting, telling us to stop feeding our kids dessert, and then eventually what happened when a doctor ate only ultra-processed foods. They were not giving us solutions to systemic problems. Health disparities are caused by environmental and structural forces. They're influenced by our access to food, shelter, safety, healthcare, education, money, mental health care, trauma-free environments, and so much else. News stories about people doing individual things to help themselves will not address health disparities in the US. Many people have asked if any of the news outlets that have recently covered ultra-processed food have reached out to me to ask about my experiences, and none have. I tagged the news outlets and journalists on my Instagram post about my results. I've sent messages to journalists through social media, and I've emailed those who have personal websites that list their email addresses. NPR journalists, including Allison Aubrey, Maria Godoy, Ari Shapiro, and Michaeline Duclef, who have been part of the conversation about ultra-processed foods, didn't get back to me. Perhaps I could say that they didn't respond to repeated requests for comments. All of this got me thinking about how legacy news coverage gets to be the truth on record, regardless of how true or complex the story is reported to be. That whatever a journalist says gets to be a fact that someone can Google and cite as the truth. Whatever is left out of the story doesn't matter in the end. Many members of the public, including myself, don't know what's missing from a story if we aren't already familiar with the subject matter. I don't know much about astrophysics and entomology, and I was conditioned to trust a news story about something I don't understand in great detail. If there was a story about the movement of celestial beings or a tiger beetle, I'm inclined to believe I get all sides on the topic. For the NPR stories about food and nutrition, there wasn't even the creation of a false binary that news outlets often create by framing something complex as an equally weighted two-sided debate. With nutrition, Slate, Self, Teen Vogue, and elsewhere. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so grateful that you joined me today. Would you like to introduce yourself for a bit and your experience?
Sure. I am a freelance writer. I mostly focus on culture, health equity, and LGBTQ plus issues and topics. And I have been a freelance journalist for about 3 years now. I started as a pandemic hobby, I guess. And I met you, Jessica, when I reached out to interview you about your book, and we had a great conversation. And I'm really excited to have another great conversation today.
I know we are reversed now. I've actually never asked you this, and I think it might be relevant. How did you find my book?
I actually got an email from your publicist about your book, and that is very relevant to the conversation about
Mhm.
how the news gets made. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, like, it was funneled to you from publicist, or like, did somebody say, "Hey, this might be up your alley"?
It was funneled to me from the publicist, and I get a like fair number of emails about books that are coming out. I assume based on other things that I've written about in the past or topics that I say that I'm interested in, and then some that have nothing to do with anything I've ever expressed interest in, like organic Botox from slugs and things like that. But yours was not in that category, and yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So, yes, that will be very relevant for later on. But yeah, it was great talking to you then. And thanks so much for coming out to book event that I
Oh
had.
yeah, that was really delightful. My partner and I had a really wonderful time and then like talked your ear off for like 20 minutes afterwards, so thank you.
No, it was great. I loved meeting them. So, my first question to you is about how literally the news gets made. So, what would you say are the channels, like the journalistic autonomy? You just mentioned that you were sent something by my publicist. Like, how does something go about becoming news?
So, in my experience as a freelance journalist not affiliated with a publication, I personally make news when I get an email from a publicist or when I become really interested in and fixated on a topic and have the experience of trying to find a timely reason that somebody should be interested in it right now. So, like when I got the email about your book, the timely reason was that the book was going to come out soon. With a lot of topics that get discussed, it is sort of like something happened with a celebrity, or something happened with our government, or there was a natural disaster, or any sort of event that would create a context where a lot of people would be looking for information about a specific thing. And that's sort of like, I feel like the most organic way that it happens. But then there's also people who have the money to hire somebody who can reach out and create interest and put a particular topic or story or person at the top of the pile of things that an editor is considering for news. So when I'm going to write about something, send emails to, editors at multiple publications and hope that one of them will be interested in what I'm talking about and that it will seem timely enough and that they don't already have somebody else on their staff writing about that same thing. And I think at publications, it can be not only that they are interested in something, but that somebody perhaps like higher up in that organization has an imperative to write about a specific thing because of internet traffic around that topic, which also kind of leads to stories related to food and stories that are not necessarily timely or news in any way where we urgently need to know about them, but just that somebody somewhere was like, a lot of people will click on this because it's related to diet culture or trying to lose weight, and those are perpetually evergreen things.
I love the term evergreen, which is definitely experience that I had. I had a bit ago at USA Today journalists reach out and want to talk about intermittent fasting, and I was like, yes, I will always talk about skipping breakfast because that's all intermittent fasting is, and that is what I will say when people want to ask me about it. But I started the call by asking, like, why are you writing about this? I thought intermittent fasting was going to last 5 minutes. Whenever it started, similar to like paleo is gone. Keto was here for a while. I mean, it has residuals, but still, intermittent fasting really seems like it has hung on. And she said that they did like a poll of like what you wanted to hear about. And this was the thing that polled as well.
You could hear about it and think to yourself, you mean like it's good that I forget to eat until 3 p.m.? That's actually, and you don't have to buy anything new for it. You can suddenly feel virtuous about what is maybe disordered eating behavior because the news told you that it was actually really healthy and you would live longer.
Yes. Then I can talk about how I skipped breakfast and it wasn't actually skipping breakfast. I'm intermittent. Yeah. Then I get to put that crown on.
And you're like, I have so much discipline and I care so much about health and definitely not about weight or appearance, only about health.
No, definitely not. Yeah. That's a good point. I like it. So you're mentioning how things become news, and you mentioned how sometimes things aren't timely or relevant. How do clicks or interest like decide what becomes news?
I feel like it's sort of an Ouroboros of like algorithms, in that you will see like one publication post something about something like intermittent fasting, maybe because a celebrity happened to mention it during an interview recently, or because they were like, we don't have enough supply chain resilience to make breakfast cereal, so we're going to tell everybody that it's good not to eat breakfast. I don't know. But it's like, after it happens the one time, then suddenly, if that article performs well, other publications will say to themselves, oh, well, we should address that topic so that we can get like a piece of that pie of clicks. And I know that there are organizations that have had like, I'm thinking of like Business Insider and like the other publications under the Insider umbrella that have had like events of staff saying, you know, I'm not okay with the way that we're incentivized based on clicks. And here is like a look at the way that we are assigned stories based on what is trending as opposed to what people need to know about. And I think that, you know, in some cases, what is trending is something that people need to know about. Like when there was wildfire smoke in New York City for the first time in my life, I was grateful that it was easy to find information about what I should do. But I don't appreciate that it is so easy to find information about other topics just because they get trendy, like things that encourage like really rampant consumerism, or things that encourage you not to eat breakfast, because I love breakfast.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned Insider, because it was definitely that outlet who posted like the things that the actors in Barbie like needed to eat, like the stuff that they need to do in order to be Barbie. And one of them, not shocked, intermittent fasting. So basically restricting was something that they had to do all together in order, to become Barbie. And I was like, oh, so really Barbie does have disordered eating, as if we had not known it before. Mm-hmm. Yes. Is it how money and incentives work for, like, say, network or broadcast journalists as well? Like, the more attention they get for their stories, the more they're incentivized to keep writing the same ones?
That's not an area that I know as much about, because it's not part of, I don't freelance for broadcast and network journalism, although if anyone wants to give me that opportunity, listen. But I think that like there's definitely a similar structure of like, people are talking about this, which means that if we talk about it, then they will come listen to us, and when they come to listen to us, then we will be able to, you know, charge more for our ads. And also, like, if we have a corporate structure above us that has interest not only in making news, but also in other things like refining oil or whatever, then
Sure.
that will help us decide what kinds of things that we should talk about and consider to be news, like, you know, how great plastic products are and how like concerns about microplastics are greatly overstated, actually. Not that that's like a widespread story, but for example, that would be like a pipeline to a story from a corporate interest as opposed to from something people needed to know for news reasons.
Okay. My next question is about who you think and who I have seen to be the like main or target audience for news shows. I particularly have critiqued NPR. I forget that there are people out there who are going to hear these stories about ultra processed food and how scary they are and not feel like shame and blame. What they're going to feel is, cool, let me just drop everything that I've eaten. Let me start fermenting foods. Let me only go to, you know, butcher shops that, you know, have humanely raised animals. I'm going to cook every night and I'm going to start baking my own bread because apparently I have time for that. I looked at Chris Van Teleken's comments about how his book got nominated for an award, and somebody said exactly that they stopped eating store-bought bread and are now making bread. And I'm like, this is who the book is for. Like, who are these people? I don't know. Lindsay, do you know who these people are?
I feel like I have a passing familiarity with these people. I see them on Instagram and they are recommended to me. Instagram like thinks that I am like a trad wife who is like raising my 8 children in the image of the Lord. It's like definitely people who want to feel like they're in control of their health and well-being, and people who also are in a disproportionately privileged position to take on a lot of work and spend a lot of money to feel like they're making healthier choices. And that's, I mean, especially for NPR, gonna be like an audience of like upper middle class, white, centrist, liberal, probably like mostly straight, definitely mostly cis people. Definitely like some, you know, really assimilationist gays in there though, for sure, in the NPR crowd. And like definitely a weird way of bringing us back around through a different path to like traditional gender roles, because like it's such an enormous amount of work that who is possibly going to have time to go to the, you know, drive an extra 30 minutes to the ethical butcher and to make the bread and to do all of these other things. And that is probably going to fall on somebody whose labor is historically less valued. And so it puts you in a position of somehow you are like, I am in the kitchen making bread for my husband while he goes to work, but in a progressive way. And like, if that is fulfilling for you and you have time, then make your bread. But like, why are you doing it? How does it make you feel about yourself? And are you right? Like, is it good? Are you good at making bread even?
I don't know anybody who's just going to be like, cool, read a book. Now
I only make my own bread.
Yeah, that's
like,
what I spend my weekends doing now.
Yeah. I like so many people, I feel like, especially during the like height of the pandemic when everyone was like, I have a sourdough starter, where like, I love making bread. It's like meditative or it's whatever the fuck. I love fungus. I don't know. But like, I feel like nobody was like, it's so fast and easy. And I don't know how, as like lives have filled back up, you would make space for that without deprioritizing something else that, and I mean like, I don't know because I can't cook. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe bread is super easy and fast to make, but that's not the impression that I get.
20-ish or maybe just 10. I don't know. Whenever Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma came out, his was all about like, there's corn in everything was the synopsis. Was one of the synopses. And a friend of mine, a guy professor, told a story of his wife going to the grocery store, buying groceries, coming home. He pulled everything out on the table and like started labeling things corn, like if they had any like additives from corn. And he was basically like everything, or however much percent of what you bought is corn. And guess what happened? Like she started crying, and he's telling me the story like, "Ha, isn't that so funny?" And I'm like, "No, like no, this is not funny. This is not a chuckle story." Like, yes, to your point, like who is this going to fall on if you can't, go to the store and buy the groceries that people have? Yes, I just want to agree with you.
I'm like thinking about this man like bullying his wife about her grocery shopping, and like, so are you gonna not eat it then? Are you gonna go grocery shopping and find food that doesn't have corn in it? Like, good luck. Right. Thanks.
And cook and do the cooking.
Yeah.
Because the things that I bought are a bit easier. You're welcome. Because she had a regular job too.
This also feels illuminating around this one time my stepmother told me that if you're going to eat corn, you might as well just eat candy. And I was really confused and taken aback. And I was also like 12. So I was like, sure, Susan. But I feel like now I understand the anti-corn sentiment.
Yeah.
And like, I know that there are people who feel empowered by worrying, because I can relate to that in some regards. Like, knowing that there is something I can be worried about makes me feel like I could do something about it. But certainly the problems that are actually facing me and most, severely impacting my life are not going to be solved if I never buy corn and only make my own bread.
Right. I have better things to be concerned with.
Yeah. And like, if you wanted to tell me to be concerned about it because like the effect of planting so much corn on the environment contributes to wildfires, then I would maybe be like, okay, so we should stop incentivizing corn growth. But that is not the same as like, you should feel bad for eating so much corn. Like, that's not going to change who gets agricultural tax credits. I just make me sad and hungry.
It seems like peer-reviewed journal articles are thought to be the gold standard in science and health writing. I've often noticed that journalists may not be able to analyze these research articles, particularly variables, who's in and who's out of the research, bias, etc., and then simply report on the study as if it were a fact, and then disseminate it to the public. I'm wondering basically what your thoughts are on that. And then also, are freelancers and or journalists like taught how to go through scientific studies at all? I mean, I can guess the answer to that one, but what do you think?
That would be great. I mean, like, there are resources available, and I have like taken, like webinars and stuff about trying to parse, like, especially science, but any kind of academic or research thing that is not designed to be easy to read, to parse it effectively. And there are like, people whose entire career is science reporting, and they have education that is specifically tailored to helping make sure that they're good at that and knowledgeable about it, and that they're not going to be taken in by the bullet points that the publicist sends to, make the study sound better than it is. And then there's all the rest of us who don't have access to that kind of education, and especially people who are on staff at publications that are telling you that you need to write like 5 stories a day, are like in a position where they can't possibly do the due diligence that should be required by stories like these, to fact check them and follow up with another source to make sure that what they're saying is accurate, and that the takeaway from the data that the publicist says is in there is really what's in there. And, and not in a way that is an excuse for publishing something that is like catastrophizing or sensationalizing or like literally not true, but an example of, I guess, like the forces at work behind somebody who gets an email that says like, new study proves that corn makes you die, and just publishes an article with the headline, corn makes you die. And, nobody at any point in that process has the means or the incentive to say, well, actually, I don't know if that's true, especially at, publications that have a profit incentive, publications that are owned by a public company with shareholders. I feel like it becomes almost impossible unless you are fortunate enough to be in an environment where you are given a lot of resources and people are very patient and you get to take a long time to do things. And I have been fortunate enough to report stories, especially when I work on stuff that is related to health, where it is like a fact-checking process that's very thorough and very specific. And like, you can't say take Tylenol without like linking to a study that proves that it's safe to take Tylenol. And that level of diligence feels, like stressful sometimes to write under, but also makes me feel confident that even though I am not like a scientist or an expert, that somebody somewhere is making sure that I'm not going to inadvertently disseminate inaccurate information because I have been taken in by something that looked really flashy.
I appreciate that, and think about the article that Michaeline Ducliffe wrote about anti-dopamine parenting, which as a title is already fantastic. Parents are right. Like, parents are already worried about doing the wrong thing, but let's just add that their child is getting too much dopamine. So what we want to do is do an anti-situation. And that was one that I put on Instagram, and people in the comments were like, yes, this was me. My parents, didn't give me, any sugar or any of this. And I had no idea how to even be around this food, or I, developed an eating disorder for having like all or nothing, like eating patterns with this. And I care about it way more. But in that, like, because of the anti-dopamine therapy situation and like the comments that are real, like that's something that first started making me think about like, what are the impacts of journalists like reporting? And then what happens? Like, it's just out there. It's just out there. There may have been a study on it, like we were discussing, but it doesn't mean that like it's helpful for the public. And what does that mean, or what does that do? And then also, why are journalists like don't have an email address available so I can ask them? Like, when there was an actual Twitter, sorry, this is a very long question. Just keep it in your head because I'll wrap around. But like, when I didn't actually reach out to journalists on Twitter, but I assume I could have if I wanted to. And now, like, there is no contact information listed for anyone. Like, how do people engage with like these topics? Or is it just then fact? That was a lot.
The contact information thing is really interesting because I have like been on both sides of that, because my day job has been in PR and also I am a journalist. And I know that one of the reasons that it can be hard to find contact information for journalists is because they are trying to avoid getting emails from publicists that are like, irrelevant or relentless, and then also that they're trying to avoid getting hateful emails from people who are angry at them about what they've published.
Sure.
And I think also that part of it is, to create a separation between the people who decide what the news is and the people who consume the news, and to like create an artificial idea that journalists are objective, or that in order to be a good journalist you have to uphold a standard of objectivity, which assumes that there is a human somewhere whose personhood is not influenced by anything, which is obviously just like, I am a straight cis white man and I believe that I am the water that I swim in, and it never occurs to me that anyone has an experience that is different than mine but equally valid. There's only me and then variations on humanity. And I think that, especially when it goes back to like realizing that science was wrong and then realizing that the reporting based on that science is wrong, there is an equally intense, maybe even more intense idea about science as like unimpeachable and not influenced by white supremacy or influenced by profit incentives. And especially when you are getting a story that's been filtered through like that lens and then filtered through the fake objectivity of journalism lens, it will end up probably being something that could not have considered who was left out of this research, or what the people that you are writing for can possibly do with the information that you think that you're giving to them. Because like with anti-dopamine parenting, even if there is like a kernel of interesting information in, the way that you can influence your own behavior or your child's behavior by eating whatever at a certain time of day, you're not being like empowered to do what you want with that information or like use it to make yourself feel better. You're being told like it is immoral to make this choice and it's moral to make this choice, and you're a bad parent if your kid has corn.
Right. We'll just bring it back to corn because corn is candy.
Corn is in everything, and everything is candy.
Right. That's the summary. That'll be the title of this episode.
Susan's going to be so mad at me.
Everything is candy, actually. I do like that. But I love all of that. You're right. I think about, eating disorder studies a lot myself, but, there's so much in just medical apartheid and research that you're right, totally influences everything that people are using as a reliable source or a credible source on these things too.
When I write about health and I am looking for something that can reinforce a point that I've made, and it's a study and it's on the CDC website, and I'm cognizant of the CDC's changing, restrictions about what is and isn't safe to do with COVID based on what is convenient for the economy. And I think to myself, I don't actually have unimpeachable trust in this source anymore. And I only ever did because I was raised in an environment where I got to think that they represented my interests, which has a lot to do with the environment I was raised in. And being a young white girl who was yes, I'm sure the CDC would never hurt me. And now there isn't an alternative to saying, I'm sure that this study was done responsibly and accurately captures the information that I hope it does. There's only hoping that somebody who has a higher level of scientific understanding and isn't beholden to the economy above all else is also doing that research.
People are we need to label these ultra processed foods. And the story is always, cereals and sodas and chips and etc. And I'm but what about Gwyneth Paltrow's Hailey Bieber smoothie, everything from Erewhon? Are we just going to slap these things on organic oat milk also? I mean, I'm fine with that if you do, but that is never part of the conversation. And the fact that journalists are not following up with those quote answers or solutions is just real weird to me. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's very you and the person that you're talking to have a shared set of beliefs that you haven't even interrogated, that you don't even know you have. And you're not, neither of you is going to say oh, is there a morality facet or a class facet to which foods we think are dangerous, because we are both, graduates of a liberal arts college and we're both white and grew up eating the same food and we're not worried about oat milk or whatever.
Yes. And we would never drink soda. So yes, put the labels all over that. True. As we're wrapping up the episode, do you want to share what happened to the article about my book?
Yeah. So I did an interview with you about your book and then filed copy based on that interview, and then had a conversation with the publication, which was Self Magazine. And you interacted with several editors and got feedback about you should have another conversation to follow up on these questions and the science that's behind these questions and whether they're supported by studies that we can link to, because this publication in particular, which publishes information about health, has a very intense process about, for example, can you link to an article that proves that it's safe to take Tylenol? And when it comes to a book that is largely about information that is not stamped with approval by those who are doing scientific research, no, it's actually not easy to find studies that can back up claims about the influence of white supremacy on how we see fatness. And the people that I was working with on that piece, who are people that I have a lot of respect for, who were also upset about what I think they were being told by somebody else that I was not communicating with, were telling me that it was not going to be possible to publish the interview that I did with you about your book because there wasn't enough pre-existing scientific information that could back up what was in the book.
Thank you for sharing. I actually hadn't gotten all the details because, we'd been going back and forth in email. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it was obviously very frustrating, and I'm sure it was very frustrating for you because it's your book and it's just an article that I wrote. And I was very interested by, obviously, there was a lot of coverage of your book and a lot of outlets where you discuss the information in your book that I don't know what their like policies are about what kind of, backup needs to be in place for what kind of things. And like, I don't know the difference between how that unrolls on broadcast news versus how that unrolls somewhere else. I think that it's a good example of the idea of like some things are just objectively true and we're not going to check on them, but things that are surprising to us, we are going to be more suspicious of and feel like we need to find more evidence for, because on the whole, this publication is one that is very like service journalism oriented, and the idea is to be very specific and prescriptive about things that people have questions about. And that comes out in like articles that I've written for them about like, food insecurity and like dealing with a cold when you don't have sick days. But it also is not applied equally maybe to an article about a book that talks about intermittent fasting or an article about a book that talks about paleo. And those are things that are not terribly scientifically supported either, but that we have a different perception of. And so it might be easier for those things to get by with the one study that exists about them. And that is all speculative because I don't know, like, ultimately what conversations happened. I don't know ultimately who said what. I know that my editor that I talked to was very upset about what happened also. And I don't think that they were lying. So
thank you for sharing that. Do you want to share what you're working on right now?
Yeah, I'm working on right now a story about how weight bias influences people who are seeking masculinizing top surgery and the training that surgeons and anesthesiologists receive around who is and isn't a good candidate or safe to do top surgery on, which has also been a very interesting story to report and had a lot of really fun conversations with people.
That's awesome. When and where can people expect that?
That will be in Self Magazine. And I don't know when it will be published. I have been working on it since last October, so it has been almost a year.
Wow. What a great example of work that takes time to be helpful and get right. Because the opportunity
and one of the reasons I wanted to write about that was because my partner is trans, but also because there's like a genre of essay that is like the trans widow essay that is written by like a cis woman who has a partner who comes out as trans and who is like, I can't believe that my boyfriend did this to me. I can't believe how this delegitimizes my entire gender, my sexuality, my whole existence. And that is something that is like routinely published again and again. And every time that topic comes up, it seems that there's an editor who's interested in that story. So I wanted to write something reporting on people who have had a very different experience. And when I was pitching the story, I got a response from an editor who had posted that she was seeking stories related to the queer experience and related to, like queer joy, and was told that it was the kind of story that didn't warrant feature coverage in this day and age because it had already been covered. And
I'm sorry, that's really rude to laugh, and it's not funny.
It was hilarious.
But like, we're done. Thank you very much. Cool.
Yeah,
wow.
We do need to keep finding the like one doctor somewhere who has an opinion on gender affirming care that is completely at odds with all other established science and also lived experiences of trans people, and tell that story over and over again. But there has been an article one time about the benefits of exploring gender and sexuality within a relationship, and therefore we don't ever need to do that again.
Wow. Lindsay, this was great. I'm so grateful that you came on to talk to people and answer my 27 questions about journalism, some of them esoteric, but just sitting here with me as I process this. I am so happy that you joined us.
I'm so grateful that you asked me. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that we finally understand how dangerous corn is. And I had a really great time.
That's great. Let's go eat candy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks again to Lindsay Lee Wallace for that interview. Her experience with my book was another reminder that even though journalists may seek stories and viewpoints that have not been covered by a news outlet, they may still meet resistance and not be able to add complexity to an existing truth. This is a reminder that those who direct and manage newsrooms have power over the narrative and continue to shape it. We've recently seen how the truth we're told is ultimately controlled by those in leadership positions of news outlets. Our awareness of how easy it is to cherry-pick information to publish is growing. It's becoming more clear when we're given simple truths and not presented with the complexity of a situation that we deserve. And we're seeing who benefits from these practices. Thinking critically and being curious are incredibly important, and two skills that weren't always cultivated in our schooling. We can practice and refine these skills and characteristics. The present moment calls for this more than ever. Until next time, let's think critically, be curious, and always make it awkward.
The best way to support this podcast is to rate it, review it. Just tell 3 friends tell 4 friends. You know what? Tell 5 friends about this show. Subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make it awkward, babies. I almost had it.
I'm leaving that laughing. Okay,
I know you are, but I could have been cool.
This has been an episode of Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. This podcast is sponsored by the Legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services, is a production of The Body Politic, and is edited and mixed by the spectacular Jen Jacobs.